They say it's bad luck when a black cat crosses your path. Well, you better believe it, especially when it's running around a big city hospital in Trapper John MD. A case of the creeps, 9:30 Saturday.
Good evening and welcome to Newsworld. Tattersalls today began the job of selling the public on its new 6 from 45 Tats Lotto system. The revised lottery is due to start on July the 6th, and despite the longer odds, Tattersalls executives are hoping the lure of bigger prizes will spark new interest in the game.
Despite some opposition from punters, Tattersalls believes its new lotto system will be a winner, for Tattersalls at least. Victorians are already the biggest lotto gamblers in the world, but a bevy of Tats executives today produced charts and statistics to show that making the game harder to win would make it more successful. There was even a demonstration draw complete with Debbie Finn and John Deeks to give it the right atmosphere. Tattersalls estimates that under the 6 from 45 system, the average First Division prize will more than double to about $366,000, and prizes in Divisions 2, 3 and 4 will also increase. But there'll only be half as many winners in Division 1, and fewer in Division 2 and 3 as well. In Division 4, there'll be an extra 20,000 winners because of the double chance provided by having 2 supplementary numbers. However, Tattersalls believes an instant fortune is the main attraction.
People like to see a big winner occasionally. If it's not you and me, at least we like to think of someone who's got total financial freedom, and the game's not achieving that at the moment.
Tattersalls even produced a cool $2 million in cash to show how much the Division 1 prize could be under the new system. But the odds of winning will also increase dramatically, from 3.8 million to 1 to a whopping 8.1 million to 1.
Overseas now, and 6 gunmen who hijacked a Jordanian airliner have released all their hostages and blown up the plane's cockpit. 65 people were on board the Boeing 727 when it was seized at Beirut's International Airport yesterday. It was forced to fly to Cyprus, onto Tunis and Sicily before returning to Beirut earlier today. The hijackers, believed to be Shiite militiamen, had threatened to kill all the hostages if the Secretary-General of the Arab League did not go to the airport to negotiate with them. First reports say that after blowing up the aircraft cockpit, the gunmen fled from the airport in a jeep. Police in Brazil say they have the first hard evidence that the remains exhumed in Sao Paulo last week are those of Nazi war criminal Josef Mengele. Meanwhile, in West Germany, prosecutors say Mengele's son cannot be prosecuted for withholding evidence or aiding in his father's disappearance.
The prosecutor who has been leading the West German search for Dr. Josef Mengele walked into a packed news conference this morning. And Hans Eberhard Klein said yes, he was in possession of the statement from the Mengele family saying they were certain the remains dug up in Brazil were that of Josef Mengele. Klein was asked today if the case was closed.
When we have more certain proof that the corpse is identical with Josef Mengele, then we could say that Mengele is dead and the case is closed. But we have not reached that stage yet.
Klein also said he has what amounts to a good faith pledge of cooperation from the family to provide additional information in the form of documents or testimony, but he has no plans yet to meet personally with them. Klein also said that all contacts may be handled through their attorney, Fritz Steinecker, who refuses to make any comment. Ralph Mengele, the 41-year-old son of Josef Mengele, seems to have had the leading role in getting the family to break their silence. When his wife Alamut was confronted yesterday at their home in Freiburg, she refused to say where he was. So far, Ralph has managed to evade all efforts to get him to talk in person. NBC News was able to get pictures yesterday of Ralph Mengele's mother, Josef Mengele's first wife, but she also refused to talk. The West German prosecutor says in addition to what the forensic experts come up with in Brazil, he will want more evidence from the Mengele family. But because of German law, that evidence, whether it's in the form of testimony or documents, will have to come voluntarily. The Mengele family cannot be compelled to cooperate.
The Papua New Guinea government is to impose a state of emergency in Port Moresby on Friday. The move follows a massive crime wave which Prime Minister Michael Somare says is threatening the lives of a large number of citizens. Under the state of emergency, a curfew will be imposed, police will have extended powers and the Defence Forces will be mobilised. Its duration has not yet been decided. Karen Ann Quinlan, the American girl who lived the last 10 years in a coma, has died of pneumonia in a New Jersey nursing home. She was 31. Karen's condition sparked a legal debate over her right to die.
Karen Ann Quinlan existed for years in a hopeless coma that sparked a nationwide controversy over her right to die. She became the focus of international attention in 1975 when Joseph and Julia Quinlan, who adopted her as an infant, filed a petition in a New Jersey Superior Court asking for permission to remove the plug from the respirator that kept her breathing. Eventually, the Quinlans were given the go-ahead to cut off the current, but Karen continued to remain comatose on a feeding tube at the Morris View, New Jersey nursing home. Last month, the Quinlans appeared on the Today program.
We've asked originally just for the right to place Karen completely in God's hands. And that's what we did when the respirator was removed.
It's still going to be as difficult letting go when death finally comes, won't it?
It certainly will be. We'll have to grieve over again.
The Quinlans, devout Roman Catholics, said they had no regrets about removing their daughter from a respirator and felt their child had a meaningful life by helping others make decisions about life support systems. The family was with Karen when she died.
Pretty much just silence, some embracing and support, but basically those moments were very silent.
Karen remained in a fetal position and in her final months weighed 70 pounds. Until her death, her parents came to the nursing home every day to visit her.
A 3-year-old boy who's unable to eat food is also the victim of a bureaucracy which can't decide who should pay to keep him alive. Treatment for Nicholas Peacock Smith is paid for by the Prince of Wales Children's Hospital in Sydney, but that will stop at the end of the month.
Nicholas was back in hospital today, but it was only a checkup so his doctor could monitor the success of treatment he receives at home.
Yeah, you've got plenty of fat on board, haven't you? Gee, that's different to a year ago. Yes. Right.
A year ago, Nicholas wasn't able to leave hospital. He has a possibly unique reaction to all food, which sends him deeply unconscious. But doctors found a procedure called alimentation, feeding all nutrition through tubes directly into veins, allows Nicholas to lead a relatively normal life. He can even live at home. That is, as long as the hospital foots the bill for his home alimentation. But the hospital can't afford that expense indefinitely.
100,000 a year, you don't need many patients, and a hospital's budget is totally put out of plumb.
While Nicholas's condition may be unique, treatment by alimentation is not. Most patients requiring this form of nutrition can be successfully treated at home, but hospitals say they can't afford to support it. For the past 12 years, federal and state health ministers have shelved proposals to set up a centralised organisation to coordinate home alimentation and to meet its costs. So patients like Nicholas may be forced to give up the freedom of home alimentation and return to a prisoner-like existence in a hospital bed.
The fate of BLF boss Norm Gallagher remains undecided tonight. The trial jury has still not managed to reach a verdict and will begin its second week of deliberations when the county court resumes tomorrow morning. Gallagher has pleaded not guilty to 43 charges of receiving secret commissions in the form of goods and services valued at $130,000. A disabled Vietnam veteran who claims he's received a raw deal from the authorities has tonight turned down numerous offers of financial help. 37-year-old Lyle Denston was convicted last year of riding a motorcycle without a licence. However, he was unable to pay the fine and says he was too sick to carry out community service work. Mr Denston says that as a matter of principle he can't accept the offers to pay his fine.
Lyle Denston is a lone father with 2 children. He was arrested in Wodonga on Saturday for failing to carry out 50 hours of community service work. He's under medication following an operation to remove his bowel, and he says he was too ill to carry out the sentence. However, he was arrested and has spent the last 5 days in prison.
And what am I in there for? Because I didn't work on a community basis because I was unhealthy.
Mr Denston claims he was unable to change his colostomy bag because of the unsanitary conditions in prison, and as a result his wound has become infected. His mother says she can't believe the way her son's been treated.
I came up here and I find him out in a cell with a bag that's not even been changed for what? No shower, no nothing. And they couldn't care less.
When Mr Denston appeared in court today, he was ordered to pay a fine of more than $400 instead of carrying out his community work.
Among the stories still to come tonight, a nationwide hunt continues for a man suspected of mass murder in the United States, and the biggest spy swap in 40 years takes place across a bridge in Berlin. A Melbourne family had a narrow escape tonight when shots were fired into a Chinese restaurant in Carlton. This report from John Selwood.
About half a dozen people were sitting in this small Chinese restaurant this evening when, without warning, a gunman opened fire. Startled guests dived for cover as 2 bullets slammed into the front window.
We heard a bang, we took no notice, and we heard a shot, and then my daughter noticed that I had blood on my face and we all went to the floor.
The table where Elsie and her 9-year-old daughter were sitting was shard with glass, and Mrs. Smith believes they were lucky to escape serious injury.
Lucky it wasn't the kids. You know, if they had been sitting there and I'm on the other side, well, you know, they might have got more than what I got.
Police have no motive for the attack and say it's possible that the shots were fired from the Housing Commission flats across the road.
Overseas again, and in Israel, at least 22 people were killed when a train ploughed into a bus near Haifa. Police say most of the dead were children who were on a school outing from Tel Aviv.
The train was travelling at 100 kilometres an hour when it ploughed into the school bus. On board, mostly 12 and 13-year-old children who were on an outing from their religious school near Tel Aviv to a Mediterranean beach. Just before the collision, one survivor said the teacher was in the back of the bus playing and singing with all the kids. Without warning, the train hit and bodies were thrown as far as 50 metres. The scale of the tragedy could be measured by the dead lying on stretchers in queues. Throughout the day, medical teams worked to save the injured and identify those killed. The accident was one of the worst in Israeli history and plunged the country into deep mourning. Authorities have said the bus either stalled on the tracks or the driver simply didn't notice the approaching train. Outside Haifa Hospital, relatives of those injured waited for good news about their sons or daughters. Inside, the survivors were treated and were later visited by Prime Minister Shimon Peres, who said, "We cry over this tragedy."
One of the biggest spy swaps since the Second World War took place in Berlin today. The exchange between the United States and East Germany took over 3 years to set up. The negotiations failed in their attempt to free 2 Soviet dissidents.
The swap took place at midday on a bridge separating East Germany and West Berlin. 23 political prisoners, most of whom are West Germans, who had been held in East German and Polish prisons, walked off one bus and onto another. 2 others decided to remain in East Germany temporarily. Some had been serving life sentences. All had been held on charges of espionage. Among the Soviet bloc spies the U.S. returned was an East German grandmother, 67-year-old Alice Mickelson. She was caught trying to leave the United States with classified military information. Marian Sikarsky, a Pole, was serving a life sentence for trying to transmit secret information related to highly sophisticated computers and missiles. Penyu Konstantinov, a Bulgarian, was charged with spying in New York in 1983. And Alfred Zehe, an East German who was picked up in Boston, was sentenced 2 months ago to 8 years in jail. The prisoner exchange was the central topic of the U.S.-East German negotiations, but during the talks, U.S. officials attempted to involve the Soviet Union to gain the release of Soviet dissidents Andrei Sakharov and Anatoly Sharansky. The attempt failed. Officials said the Soviets weren't interested.
It was another day of falling prices on Australian share markets. On a $24 million turnover here in Melbourne, the All Ordinaries dropped a further 2.5 points. The other major indicators were also down. Among the major stocks today, BHP went against the trend to put on 2 cents, as did the ANZ, which was up 7. But most other stocks were down, including the National Bank, Westpac and Bridge Oil. Now to midweek Tatslotto, and with the First Division prize pool standing at more than $364,000, the numbers you need are 2, 7, 17, 18, 21, 37 and the supplementary number 25. Well, it seems the world of keeping fit is undergoing a revolution in Britain. Gone is the era of aerobics into a new age of tap dancing. As our London Bureau Chief Lee Hatcher discovered, all you need is a sense of rhythm and a pair of metal-tipped shoes.
For today's woman, if there is such a thing, there is life after aerobics. The Pineapple Dance Studio is leading the way back to tap. They are straight exercise classes. At the moment, no fewer than 6 West End shows feature tap dancing. And right around Britain, these classes are springing up for anybody who just wants to keep fit. The teachers of tap promote it as the healthiest form of exercise.
Well, it's not as hard on the body. It's as hard on the brain, that's for sure. But it's very popular because it's within the scope of more or less everybody.
And the good thing about tap is that no matter how bad you are, It always sounds good. It is hard work, keeps the legs and body in good trim, and they say it's good for your brain.
I just think you have to think so
my
much
brain
all the
gets
time.
sore.
My brain gets tired.
I'm tired, my brain gets tired.
It seems fun.
It is fun.
It's joyous, actually. What's good about TAP, I think, is you get an instant result. I mean, you can hear yourself dancing. I mean, look at me, Ma, I'm dancing.
And it's something for all ages. The oldest pupil here is in his 90s. Lee Hatcher in London for Newsworld.
Well, sports next. Peter Donningan back with tonight's main stories after this break, including some ambitious new plans for the future of the league.
Good evening, everyone. North Melbourne President Bob Ansett said today that his club had applied to the league to play another match under lights at the MCG for premiership points. The application is to play either the round 14 match against Carlton or the 20th round game against the Tigers on a Friday night. Mr Ansett also told Peter Landy today of a plan by which he hopes to once again start the football turnstiles clicking.
The round 1 night game between the Roos and Collingwood attracted over 60,000 to the MCG, but Mr Ansett believes night games are just one small way of keeping the turnstiles ticking over. He told me today he believed the time was right for the VFL to immediately take in extra clubs.
I really believe that we've got to look very deeply at an extension of the competition. It really hasn't changed much in 60 years, with the exception of the Swans going to Sydney. And when you look at the progress being made by the National Basketball Association, again it seems to me the logical thing to do is expand the competition and create a new level of interest. And I don't think there's any other way of solving the problem. Our individual interests have changed greatly over the last 10 years, and we have other diversionary activities rather than going to the football each week.
How would you expand it?
I'm sure that there are all sorts of ways it could be done, but I'm just fearful that we're looking for excuses to justify a downturn in attendance. I heard the league commissioner was quoted as saying last week that maybe one way of resolving it would be to have the game of the day played at the MCG. Well, we'd be diametrically opposed to that.
In other sporting news, preparations are in full swing for one of the great golf tournaments of the world, the US Open. Last year, Australian Greg Norman lost in a playoff to Fuzzy Zeller, but if the Great White Shark is to take off this year's title, he'll have to beat more than just the best golfers in the world.
It looks like being one of the wettest starts in Open history on Thursday US time at the Oakland Hills course in Michigan. Heavy rain has been falling for the past 36 hours, saturating the already difficult course, once dubbed the Monster by Ben Hogan. And the rain is certainly not going to make putting any easier. Guillermo Vilas today announced his retirement from tournament tennis. The winner of 4 Masters titles between 1971 and 75 and the Australian Open champion in 78 and 79, Vilas was ranked amongst the top 6 in the world for 8 years running from 1974. Closer to home, and several of England's leading jumps jockeys arrived in Melbourne today for the Australia-England Cross-Country Challenge. The group, including Steve Smith-Eccles and Grand National winner Hywell Davies, will meet Australian riders in a series of races which begin at Moonee Valley on Saturday. And jockeys Russell Beauchamp and Michelle Overall were lucky to escape serious injury in this spectacular fall at Bundamba in Queensland today. The crash occurred just after the finish, and miraculously Beauchamp suffered no injuries apart from being dazed and shaken, while female apprentice Overall has a cut to her head.
And finally, a look at the main TAB details from this evening's program of harness racing at Terang and the Greyhound card at Ballarat. TAB double at Terang on the combination 1 and 2 paid $4.80, the extra double 11 and 5 $79.05, and the quadrella on 8, 1, 5 and 2 $1,134.90, whilst at the Greyhounds at Ballarat, where I'd imagine it may have been a little cool, numbers 5, 8, 1 and 4 for $38.40. And that's all in sport. Speaking of Ballarat's weather, our weather prospects are coming up next, and the forecast is for another fine and partly cloudy day with a top temperature of 15 degrees. Laurie back with the details after this break.
Now the weather, and not too much of a change on the way over the next day or so, I'm afraid. Looking at the synoptic chart, that high near the head of the bight will become the dominant factor on our weather, with the cold front approaching the southwest of the continent, affecting the west of the state later in the day. Apart from isolated showers in the southwest tomorrow, we can expect a cool and generally fine day. On the bays, west to southwesterly winds of 10 to 15 knots will tend northwesterly during the day with slight to choppy seas. And in Melbourne, a fine and partly cloudy day. The outlook for Friday, fine and cool. The temperature tonight will drop to 5 degrees and rise tomorrow to a top of 15, while currently in the city it's 10 degrees. Well, that's it from Newsworld for tonight. Just repeating the TATS 2 numbers drawn earlier. The winning combination 46 and 89 for a prize of $1,117. News overnight via satellite from the United States at midnight. We'll have more news tomorrow in 11 a.m. and Mal Walden back with our next edition of 7 National News at 6:30 tomorrow night. Until then, from all of us here in the 7 News team, good night.